Alright, so I'm recording this on October 9th. On this episode of the Athletic Acuity Sports Podcast, I'm going to be going over my 32-team NFL Power Rankings, along with a game that I call Jinx/Reverse Jinx, where I go over a few of my season-long bets that I made before the season started, and kind of go over which ones appear to be nailed in as pretty good and which ones appear to be pretty bad right now. But before any of that, I wanted to go over the situation with the Tennessee Titans. So the Bills-Titans game is going to be rescheduled for Tuesday evening, and the Bills-Chiefs game that was originally scheduled for the upcoming Thursday game is now going to be rescheduled to Sunday. The Patriots-Broncos game is going to be moved to Monday, similarly to how the Patriots-Chiefs game last week was moved to Monday. So a lot of people want Tennessee to have some kind of penalty given to them for kind of disrupting the NFL. I don't necessarily disagree that Tennessee should be punished in some way. My issue is just that I don't really see a punishment that is sensible at this particular time. I think the league has handled this situation pretty well. I think the NFL kind of realizes that forfeiting should be a last resort for any NFL game. And so the other thing that people have been mentioning other than forfeiting is to say, well, maybe the Titans should be, deprived of some of their draft capital in future off seasons. The only issue that I have with that is that every team only has so much draft capital. And so if you want to take away Tennessee's first round pick and give it to Pittsburgh, for example, the problem is that if there's, more missed games down the road, it kind of makes you wonder, well, Pittsburgh's getting a draft pick, why didn't they get a forfeit? And, why did this other team get a forfeit but not a draft pick? In addition to that, we can't just take away the Titans' picks for the foreseeable future. Like, we can't just take every first and second round pick from them for the next, 8 years or something if they miss that many games. Chances are they're going to kind of get things together. I will say that they've handled this pretty poorly, and it seems like some of the players and coaching in Tennessee haven't really taken the protocols as seriously as they should have. But at the same time, unfortunately, Tennessee might not be the only team, right, that ends up being in this situation. So as much as people probably want the Titans to, be an example of how not to do things and they should be punished accordingly, there isn't unlimited draft capital to take away, and there's certainly not unlimited fair draft capital to distribute. And the other thing is that there's just lots of little ramifications. The Eagles now have to play Pittsburgh following a bye week. And the other thing is that, there's other teams that have also been hurt by the COVID issue, specifically the Patriots, but they continued and carried on and played their game against Kansas City. So it's kind of a difficult situation. I don't think fairness is going to be something that is attainable in this particular regular season, but I think the NFL has actually done a pretty good job of not resorting to forfeiting games and not yet making any, rash decisions regarding taking away a team's draft capital. Okay, so moving on to the Jinx/Reverse Jinx game. I'm basically going to be going over predictions, season-long bets from before the season started, and take a look at which ones look good and look bad at this moment. So I'll start off with a good one, and I will oscillate back and forth. Before this season started, I was all in on the Seattle Seahawks. They're currently 4-0. I have their over 9.5 wins. I have invested 3 different times in Seattle to win the NFC West at plus 225, plus 260, and plus 210. Back in February, I got them plus 900 to win the NFC and plus 1800 to win the Super Bowl. Russell Wilson, I have as plus 600 to win the MVP. I have done a little bit of hedging since then. Green Bay looks like the other team that could compete with Seattle for the 1 seed and, for the right to end up going to play in the Super Bowl. Green Bay right now is actually plus 450 to win the NFC. I see Green Bay is plus 950 to win the Super Bowl. I think those are both decent bets. Seattle's prices have come way down since I invested in them. Plus 350 the Seahawks are to win the NFC currently. And they are now only plus 600 to win the Super Bowl. So people have been jumping on the Seahawks. I think at this very moment in time, Green Bay is probably a slightly better bet than Seattle because their odds are better. But also, in addition to that, I think that, the Packers play in probably an easier division. I think that Green Bay has a much better chance of winning more of their divisional games than Seattle does, because I think the Seahawks just frankly play in a really difficult division. So, unfortunately, if it comes down to like the difference between a 13-3 record and a 12-4 record, I think Green Bay has a slight edge on the Seahawks for right now. And on a side note, I like the extra playoff game that we're going to get in the wild card rounds with respect to the new playoff format and everything, but something about just one of the teams in each conference getting a bye doesn't really feel right. I feel like either two teams should get a bye or there just shouldn't be a bye anymore, because the bye is such a enormous advantage for whatever team gets it for any playoff tournament. And it used to be a huge advantage for the 1 and the 2 seed. Now it's just being given to one team, and the thing is that the regular season's a little bit noisy. I don't necessarily think that, the best and most deserving team is necessarily getting the bye. And I also think that even if the most deserving team does get the bye, it might not necessarily be a format that I agree with. Like, I don't know if the most deserving regular season team should get that large of an advantage over the rest of the field within their own conference. So a team that I probably screwed up pretty badly is Buffalo. The Bills are 4-0, and I think that I really got a fundamental misjudgment of Buffalo before the season started. I have the Bills under 9 wins and not under 8.5 wins. Most of my incorrectness about the Bills as a team is a function of Josh Allen being a whole heck of a lot better than I thought he would be going into this year. I thought he would be a decent fantasy quarterback. He has kind of a rushing floor, but a lot of other things have gotten better with him. I think maybe some kind of lessons to keep in mind here is that potentially deep ball accuracy might be a lot more volatile than I initially considered. And, Josh Allen could be somebody that we look back on and think, well, he wasn't good at throwing the ball downfield in 2018 or 2019, but he got a lot better at it for 2020. The other thing about Josh Allen is that his decision-making has been a lot better so far. I don't think the Bills have played like a great defense yet, but Josh Allen deserves a lot of credit. He's playing as firmly one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, and I did not see that coming. A team that I think I was on the right side of was Minnesota, under 9.5 wins and minus 105 to miss the playoffs. The Vikings are 1-3 right now, and I like the way this looks for me moving forward. I think that Kirk Cousins is a quarterback that needs everything to be in place for him to be successful, and the Vikings right now don't have a good offensive line. They also don't have a good defense. They have nobody to play corner. They don't have anybody to cover. Gladney's been a disappointment so far. I don't think that they had enough on the roster going into this year, so Minnesota as an under was probably the right side. A team that I look incorrect about right now are the LA Rams. So I've got the Rams under 8.5 wins. I also had them at minus 105 to miss the playoffs. They are 3-1 right now. This is the one bet out of the ones that I think look bad right now where I feel like I could potentially still cash in on it. The Rams still have to play the 49ers twice, they still have to play Seattle twice, and they have to play Arizona twice. So they're in a really difficult division. I'm going to give the Rams credit because their offense has looked good. Jared Goff has looked good. The offensive line's actually been really good this year, and they do have some good receivers. So offensively, I think they are a good team. I still have major question marks about their defense. I think their depth defensively is really weak, actually. Outside of Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald, they really don't have a lot of other good pieces, and I think a lot of times with defense, you're only as good as your weakest link. So a team that I feel good about right now is the San Francisco under 10.5 wins. The Niners are 2-2. I also did mention San Francisco plus 330 before the season started to miss the playoffs. They've been berated with injuries at key positions. It's been really difficult. I think they've actually looked pretty good considering all the injuries so far. And the tricky thing here with the Niners is that they're actually getting some of their more valuable players back from injury. Specifically, Garoppolo's coming back. Kittle is back and looked really good. Deebo Samuel is coming back. So I actually think the Niners could end up being an okay team, but 10.5 is a really steep number, as I thought before the season started. So a bet that doesn't look so good right now, the Bears, under 8.5 wins, under 8 wins. They're currently 4-1. So this Bears team is kind of interesting. Going into the year, I felt like I was betting against Trubisky, and now all of a sudden, Nick Foles is in as the starter. I think Foles came in a little bit quicker than I anticipated, but, as much as I might want to say that Foles deserves credit, the Bears probably should have lost to Detroit. They won very unconvincingly against the Giants. They probably should have lost to the Falcons, and they won in a really tight game against Tampa Bay yesterday night. I don't really feel like I should be convinced of this team, but they are 4-1, and when it comes to win-loss records, the regular season is noisy. It's only 16 games long, so it makes sense that a team like Chicago could potentially just win a few more games than they otherwise should have. Every year there's a couple of fluky teams that end up really good when, their process is not as good as their results. So another team that I feel like I was right about, the New England Patriots. They're only 2-2 right now, but I have them over 8.5 wins, over 9 wins. I feel pretty good about those. The one bet that I don't feel as good about is plus 135 to win the AFC East, because Buffalo has been so good to start the season. The good news for the Pats is that I think, as I thought before the season started, their offensive line is really, really good. Their secondary is extremely good. They've got the best coach in the NFL. They really have, a coach who's distanced himself from really every other coach in the NFL when it comes to preparation, organization, and just studying the opponent. Cam Newton has looked good in this offense. I think Josh McDaniels has done a nice job kind of implementing plays that, kind of help bring out the best in Cam Newton based on his skill set. I am a little bit worried about the fact that they don't have a lot of weaponry on the outside, but, I talked about this earlier in a different podcast. I think the Patriots are a better version of what the Ravens have always been trying to be. The Patriots have a better secondary. They are able to actually shift games because of their defense, which is a little bit more rare in the current NFL. Cam Newton is being used as a runner, similarly to how the Ravens use Lamar Jackson. The Patriots really do have an opportunity, I think, to be one of the better teams in the AFC, and I think that, as we saw in that Kansas City game, they gave the Kansas City Chiefs a real scare in the first half, specifically with what they were doing on defense to confuse Mahomes. They just had such good coverage downfield. Mahomes so many times had to just tuck it down and try to make something happen with his legs, but of course the Patriots also had spies on him. The good news for the Patriots moving forward is that their 2 losses so far are against Seattle and Kansas City. I think those are 2 of the best teams in the NFL. Buffalo, who is in their division, has not had to play Kansas City or Seattle yet, so the Patriots could potentially, kind of even things up as time goes on here. The other thing about New England is that as much as the COVID thing is a problem, and it is problematic for right now, Cam Newton and Stephon Gilmore are 2 of the most valuable players, maybe the 2 most valuable players on this team. Both of those guys getting COVID now probably means they're going to be less likely to have COVID in the future. And I think New England can win against Denver with, a guy like Stidham or Brian Hoyer, whoever they decide to put in at quarterback. I think New England is good enough to beat Denver with one of their backup quarterbacks, and after that they have a bye week. So I think that, the future could look good for New England. A team that I feel like I was wrong about right now, Houston. They're 0-4. They just fired Bill O'Brien. I had them over 7.5 wins, and I had them at plus 360 to win the AFC South. So the Texans still have Deshaun Watson. That's really all that they have going for them at this point. No more DeAndre Hopkins, as Bill O'Brien made sure to get rid of him. The only thing that I could see happening here is maybe Bill O'Brien being gone kind of releases some tension from this team. He's really had a stranglehold on the franchise for a long time. He was an incompetent general manager. I think Houston ownership should be embarrassed for how long Bill O'Brien served as the GM. Okay, and two more ones that look good, but I'm pretty nervous about them. I had the Chargers under 7.5 wins, under 8 wins. It was one of my biggest plays of the offseason. They're currently 1-3, but I am nervous about it. Even though they defeated Cincinnati, they probably shouldn't have won that game. They went on to lose 3 straight close games. They should probably be 2-2 right now. In addition to that, Justin Herbert looks a lot better than I thought he would. I think I was wrong about Justin Herbert. He's already exceeded my expectations. So the Chargers are a team that I'm a little bit fearful of. Their schedule also opens up quite a bit and gets easier. The other team whose bet looks good right now, I had the Browns over 8.5 wins. They're currently 3-1. It's a little bit fraudulent. I don't think they've necessarily beaten a good team yet, or at least I don't think they've looked good in any game yet. But I guess we'll have to find out whether or not this team is secretly not very good, or if this team is just waiting to kind of come together and they've gone 3-1 despite not playing super well so far. All right, moving on to the NFL Power Rankings. At 32 and 31, I have the 2 New York teams, the Jets at 32, the Giants at 31. Both teams are 0-4. One thing I was kind of thinking about with the Jets is if you replaced Adam Gase with Bill Belichick, Sam Darnold with Tom Brady, and you just added Stephon Gilmore to this team, isn't this team a little bit Patriot-like in terms of how bizarre some of their offensive weapons are? This team is using Frank Gore as their running back. They actually wanted to trade a draft pick for Kalen Ballage. The receivers are Jamison Crowder, who's okay. Then they've got Braxton Berrios and Chris Hogan as the other starting receivers. Usually the Patriots have really good offensive lines, so the Jets' offensive line, wouldn't be up to standard there, but I just thought it was interesting. Like, this team is really strange. They're not very good offensively. In fact, I think they're probably the worst offensive team in the NFL. So I've got them ranked dead last. The Giants at 31. The thing I've been thinking about with Daniel Jones, I think his player comp is Rex Grossman. I think that he is really prone to fumbling the ball, turns it over very frequently, throws a lot of interceptable passes, also has some downfield ability passing the football, but ultimately I think it's tough to win with a guy like that. So the Jets and Giants, I think, are going to be competing for the first overall pick. At 30, I have Jacksonville. I think that their defense is really, really terrible outside of a couple good moments out of C.J. Henderson, and I don't think Minshew is quite good enough for them to climb out of this mess. At 29, I've got Denver. They're 1-3. Their quarterback situation is a disaster. At 28 and 27, I have 2 NFC North teams, Minnesota at 28, Detroit at 27. Both teams are 1-3. I've already mentioned I think Minnesota's in a terrible position moving forward. They've got a big running back contract. They've paid kickers and punters, fullbacks. They have no one to play corner. And as much as I like what I'm seeing out of Justin Jefferson, I just don't know if there's enough around Kirk Cousins for it to be successful. I think it could be a long season for Minnesota. As for Detroit, Stafford hasn't been that good. I am starting to kind of lose patience with the whole thing. I think Patricia is probably going to be fired shortly. At 26, I have the WFT, Washington football team, at 1-3. I did have a couple points to make about Washington. So, first of all, back during the draft, during the offseason, I talked about how I would have taken Tua Tagovailoa at 2 instead of Chase Young. Washington, surprise, surprise, Dwayne Haskins sucks. He's not good, all right? So they're benching him. And instead of bringing in a guy who would, give your whole franchise hope like Tua Tagovailoa, they're actually just bringing in Kyle Allen, who we know isn't very good. Like, he might get a couple plucky wins here and there, but ultimately we know Kyle Allen isn't going to be a long-term starter. We're pretty confident of that. So anyway, Chase Young's a great defensive end. Tua could have been a great quarterback for this team, and he's not, because the Dolphins, a team that I think actually did a pretty smart job in the draft, they're going to have a lot more hope going into this year, just because they have Tua on their roster and they want to see what he can do. Washington is going to have probably a hard time justifying the value of a good defensive end versus the value of a good quarterback. Here's the other point that I wanted to make about Washington. And the first point was obviously negative. I obviously think that, based on how bad Haskins has been, it was pretty obvious that Tua could have, made the situation a little bit better for the long-term outlook of the franchise. The positive thing I wanted to point out, I've seen on sportsbooks that the Cowboys and Eagles are both even money to win the NFC East. Washington is like 10-1 right now, even 11-1 on some sports books. I don't like the team, but I do like the number. Washington is being undervalued to win the NFC East on sports books. Just throwing it out there. I don't like this team, but they have an okay coach. I'm frankly pretty concerned about the Kyle Allen experiment, but just throwing it out there. I think the number is mispriced by the market. At 25, I have Miami. 24, I have Carolina. The 2-2 Panthers, 2-0 without Christian McCaffrey. Just for a little, running backs aren't very important nugget of information. 23, Philadelphia. 1-2-1 Eagles, right behind the team that they tied against at Cincinnati. 1-2-1 at number 22. Just wanted to point out, Joe Burrow, 3-0-1 against the spread. He's been really good so far. I think they've got a real quarterback there. He could be one of the top 10 guys in the NFL at the quarterback position. I think he's really good. Considering how bad his offensive line is, some of the plays he's made have been pretty special, and I like the direction of the Bengals franchise. They are in a tough division, so they're probably going to get beaten up a little bit here throughout the season, but this is a team that I think is generally headed in the right direction. At 21, I have the Falcons, who are 0-4. So in the NFC Over-Unders podcast before the season started, I saw the Falcons were at 7.5 wins. I kind of thought to myself, you know what? I kind of like the team. But then I decided to not bet the over-under win total for the Falcons because things like this happen. So anyway, now you know. Don't bet the Falcons win totals or any Falcons bets, frankly. Although I will say I do think Atlanta probably will get the win this week against Carolina. At number 20, I've got Houston, who's 0-4. Frankly, I just think their last chance at being really good rides on them kind of turning around mentally or something based on the coaching change, but that's, not really something that's easy to quantify. Obviously, of course, Deshaun Watson being there could also help them out. 19, I've got the Chargers. 18, I've got Arizona. After the hot start, the Cardinals have struggled in the past couple of games. I don't think they're that good of a team yet. I think that their future seasons bets are a lot better off than their current season bets. I've already mentioned this. I think Kyler Murray has blossomed as a fantasy quarterback, not yet as a reality quarterback. At 17, I've got the Raiders. At 16, I've got the Cowboys. So I still think Dallas should be favored to win the NFC East, but, I mentioned I think Washington and Philly could be lurking around in a way that's probably unsettling for a Cowboys fan. This defense is so bad that it has to get better in the next few weeks. Things have to regress for them. Their offense looks good, which is the important part, so we'll see what the Cowboys are made of in the next few weeks. At 15, I've got the Bears, who are 4-1 now. I talked about how I probably missed on their win total before the season started. One thing that I did not miss on with the Bears is I really liked two of their draft picks that have hit so far. Jalen Johnson, one of their second-round picks, I had rated as the third overall corner in the 2020 class behind only Okudah and Christian Fulton, and he's been really good. He's been really impressive to watch. The other guy that I think has done well is Darnell Mooney, wide receiver out of Tulane. I had a mid to early third-round grade on Darnell Mooney. I just thought he was a really good deep route runner and that he would offer a team explosiveness. I wasn't as high on Cole Kmet, their other second-round pick, who I had more of a fourth-round grade on. I just didn't see him as that good of a receiver. The interesting thing about the Bears is, as much as I want to fade their quarterback situation, they actually have two really good corners right now on defense, and they have a way to pressure the other team's quarterbacks. They have pretty decent safeties. Eddie Jackson's a really good player. Offensively, Robinson's there as a good number one receiver. I think that they have enough kind of across the board on their roster to the point where, they're not that bad of a team. And the 4-1 record is fluky. It's noisy, but ultimately, this team isn't as bad as I thought they would be. At 14, I have the 3-1 Cleveland Browns. At 13, I have the 3-1 Colts. They play each other this weekend. I don't have a great feeling about which team is going to win. The only thing I did want to bring up is that I think the Colts have been a little bit overrated in terms of their defense. A lot of people are pointing out, that their defense is so highly rated. I would argue the Colts defense is mediocre, but they do a good job of limiting plays downfield. So they're not going to get crushed, but they're not necessarily a great defense. I think, their defense looking good so far is a function of playing bad teams, which is really what they've done. At 12, I've got the Rams. At 11, I've got the Saints. Saints are 2-2. Drew Brees not being willing to throw the ball downfield is kind of an issue that I'm seeing at this point. I also think that Tampa Bay being a decent team is something that is going to hurt New Orleans. The Saints really aren't in a position to get the bye that they probably would need to go to the Super Bowl. I think they are a team that's probably more likely to start either a Jameis Winston or a Taysom Hill before the season is over than they are to make a deep playoff run. I have Tampa Bay at number 10. They're 3-2, coming off of kind of a difficult loss on Thursday Night Football. This Bucs defense is quite good. I really like their outside corners. Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean have been really good this year, and my guy, Antoine Winfield Jr. out of Minnesota, has been good. I think they have a really talented defense, and their defense can keep them within, certain point totals of the better teams out there. The issue that I have is that, and it was weird to me that this team was actually a pretty popular Super Bowl pick before the season started. Brady's 43 years old, and, I understand that the offense hasn't clicked yet because they haven't been healthy. I personally think Chris Godwin is the best receiver on Tampa Bay, and he hasn't been healthy. But with all of that being said, there are some red flags. Brady's 43. He doesn't look as good as he has in years past, even though I think he's looked better than other veteran quarterbacks like Matt Ryan and Drew Brees so far. My biggest problem with the Bucs is that when you combine last year and this year, they're one of the most penalized teams in the NFL. So, as much as I like Bruce Arians and a lot of the things he does, this team is really dissimilar from what Brady was able to work with in New England. I think that the Patriots were very good about being buttoned up, and this Tampa Bay team is the opposite of that. A little bit too loose, I think, with some of the little things. At number 9, I have Tennessee, 3-0 record, 0-3 against the spread, and also, the only spread they've covered is the spread of the coronavirus. I still like this team. I think that Tannehill has actually been a pretty good quarterback. He's been one of the 6 or 7 best quarterbacks in the NFL since the beginning of last season. They might get A.J. Brown back. We don't know yet. We don't know if they're playing. If this team doesn't have to forfeit games, I think they're still pretty good, and I think that they could be one of the 5 best teams in the AFC potentially. At number 8, I've got San Francisco. The Niners are currently 2-2. I like the players that they're getting back. Jimmy Garoppolo is probably going to start this week against Miami. George Kittle is back. He looked great in his game against Philadelphia. Brandon Ayuk looks like a real player. Deebo Samuel is coming back and starting to get reintegrated into the offense. I think that the Niners defense, despite all the injuries, is actually still okay. They might be getting Richard Sherman back at some point. The Niners, I think, probably 8-9 win-ish team, maybe 10. I still feel good about their under 10.5, but I think they could be the second best team potentially in their division. At 7, I've got Pittsburgh, who is still undefeated. At 6, I have the Buffalo Bills at 4-0. At number 5, I have Baltimore. Baltimore 3-1 right now. It's weird to me that so many people were picking Baltimore to either win the Super Bowl or come out of the AFC this year before the season. They still haven't won a playoff game, and I still think they're a little bit fundamentally flawed. They're still very good relative to an average team. I just worry that this is a team that is built to beat bad teams. I think of them a little bit like how everybody before the 2019-2020 NBA season was just picking Philadelphia blindly almost to win the Eastern Conference. It's like, well, the talent is there, but your track record isn't, you haven't done anything in the playoffs yet. I'm not saying Baltimore can't do it, but it was weird to me that they were, neck and neck with Kansas City, even though they've never beaten Patrick Mahomes. Lamar Jackson has never defeated Patrick Mahomes, and I think it's going to be a while until that happens. I guess we'll find out this year, but I'm a little bit worried that Baltimore is just a team that's built to beat bad teams. At number 4, I've got New England at 2-2. Their 2 losses are to Seattle and Kansas City, so I'm willing to forgive them for that. Their 2 most valuable players, Cam Newton and Stephon Gilmore, are currently people who have tested positive for COVID. There's good and bad news, of course, with that. The good news is that those guys might be less likely to have COVID later on. The bad news is that they're without those guys right now. They do play Denver this week, and then they have a bye. So New England could potentially get out of this and, potentially have a better future outlook than people are currently considering. Really quick, I just wanted to point out the Patriots have plummeted to plus 1,400 to win the AFC. I think there's a little bit of value there. I also still kind of like them plus 200 to win the AFC East. I think that people are out on New England for the wrong reasons. This is a team that I think is still pretty darn good. They've got the best coach. They've got a quarterback who does fit what they're doing offensively. And their defense is very good. Even though Wilson exploited it, we saw that they gave Mahomes and the Chiefs a little bit of problems. I've got the 4-0 Seahawks at number 3, the 4-0 Packers at number 2, and the 4-0 Chiefs at number 1. I think these 3 teams are pretty interchangeable. I've talked extensively about why I like all these teams moving forward. Green Bay is probably the one that I think has moved up the most in the past week or so, just because I think they looked really sharp against Atlanta. They've really, they really haven't blinked this year. They beat New Orleans in New Orleans without Devontae Adams, which was pretty impressive. All of these 3 teams have question marks defensively. Specifically with Seattle, they've been exceptionally bad defensively so far. I think it's a function of them playing good offenses. Usually when a defense doesn't look good, they're a lot closer to being average than they are bad. So I think that's kind of the message here with Seattle and Green Bay. I think if anything, Green Bay at least has a little bit more of a pass rush, and Jair Alexander is probably a better corner than Seattle has on their roster right now. And then, I've still got the Chiefs at number 1. I think Seattle and Green Bay are going to fight over the 1 seed. Kansas City, to me, is a slightly clearer path to getting the 1 seed in the AFC. Just to further the point that quarterback play dictates game outcome more than any other variable, Kansas City, Green Bay, and Seattle are pretty unanimously considered as the 3 best teams in the league right now, or at least they should be. And they've got the 3 quarterbacks who are probably not only playing the best in the league right now, but are just generally the best 3 quarterbacks in the NFL, period. All right, that's it for this episode of the Athletic Acuity Sports Podcast. Thanks for listening.